see the full screen? You can? Yeah, just nod if it were no, yeah. um, and if people's um, if like the people's faces are in the way of your screen, you can just go right up here and go like that, um, and that way you can see the whole screen there. So, all right, well, I am going to get started. Thanks again to Naomi for the intro. My name is Ben Fairbank, and I'm an ecological designer and consultant. Um, I do anything from master plans for residential properties to property management and natural resource management, particularly in fragile ecosystems near wetlands and near the coast. And I'm also on the Wellfleet Conservation Commission, so I spent a lot of time thinking about the most sustainable practices for our land use today. Now, this particular workshop today, I'm going to be focusing on the history of Cape Cod and how that can inform our approach for a no-till backyard farm. And so this is kind of like very broad strokes, but there's a lot of information that we can glean from accounts in history, either our oral history, our cultural history, but also our natural history. And we can find evidence of all of these things inside of our soil. So I guess I'll just just get started by first reviewing what no-till farming is. And I guess one question I have for everybody, and feel free to unmute yourself at any time. I'm gonna ask you questions as well, and so just feel free to unmute yourself and shout the answer out or whatever. So don't hold back. I want this to be very interactive. So so I guess I would just start by asking, has anybody here been to one of my previous workshops, or is everybody first time?
First time.
First time?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. This is a fresh crowd. All right, that sounds good. So that's really awesome. So I will then do a little bit of review. Does anybody has anybody heard of no-till farming by any chance?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And does anybody do it already? Are you experienced in this, or?
I don't till my raised beds.
Yeah. Right. So essentially, that's really good. That's what I want you to do. That's what I'm trying to promote. That kind of approach. And so what this workshop, the beginning of this workshop will be about is kind of like, what else do you do other than no-till? Like what do you have to factor in? What do you have to think about? It's not enough to just leave it alone, right? Because weeds will grow and whatever. What else can you do to really maximize the benefits of no-till? And so that, sorry, go ahead.
Compost.
Compost, exactly. And what does the compost produce? I guess for the
soil.
Soil, right? Okay. And what was that, Fred?
Organics.
Organics, exactly. Nutrients. And so it's kind of a balance. So we're gonna dig into the layers of soil, as like you can see kind of how history has transpired by looking at these soil profiles. And so so yeah, so just kind of thinking about it, we're also looking at what's called the soil food web. Where do all those nutrients come from? They come from a vast network of both microscopic and just very tiny creatures and microorganisms and fungus and everything that interact and create this huge web. Essentially a food chain, but it's so intricate that you can't really look at it as a chain. It's more of a web. But everything from microscopic organisms all the way up to how we at the top of the food chain consume consume the resources that are generated from the soil food web, and everything's connected, all the way down on every level and every size of organisms. So these are just kind of some examples. The picture on the right, that shows leaf litter organics. This is the top organic layer of the soil that gets replenished every year when the fall comes and the leaves and the leaves continue the decomposition process. And the picture to the left is a microscopic images of what you would find in the soil, and there's vast quantities of different species of bacteria and fungus, nematodes, predators, all kinds of things. It's not that there are so many of them in the ground, it's that there are also so many different types of species. Some of them actually might be bad for your soil, some of them might be pests, but generally when you promote a wide diversity of what's in your soil, that's how you can really generate a lot of nutrients for your soil. And so this is the apex of our no-till farming conversation, is how do we do that? How do we build this biodiversity into the soil? And so just gonna send you guys to a little video here. And just to warn you, oh, that's actually not the video I thought it was. Hold on. Bear with me here. Oh, this thing is annoying. So here we go. I think that was at the very end of this. So, okay. Go here. All right, can everybody see this?
Yes.
All right.
Hey guys, welcome to my garden. I'm out here planting some tomato plants and some oregano and basil, and I decided to do a couple other things that I wanted to show you that would help my soil, that would ultimately help the plants, and that is to do a couple things that promotes the soil food web and all of those little critters that are in the soil that exchange nutrients and help the soil become really, really healthy for your plants. So I'm just going to show you a couple tricks that I do in this garden every single year. And right now it's July, so it's kind of a late season planting right now, but what I'm going to do is what I do every year in terms of how I get the soil prepared. So right here, as you can see, the first step is to have the ground prepared with all this mulch, okay? So this mulch I put down in the winter, and it basically protected all the soil from the really, really cold weather. And what this also does is it creates a lot of nutrients for the soil that will be really beneficial to the plants. Now, I don't just want to do this. I want to leave this here. And then I'm also going to put in some cow poop. So here is a bucket of cow manure that we got from a farm. And this is actually going to be full of all of that life, like worms live in here, all kinds of bugs like mites and everything. And so this is the kind of creatures and critters we actually do want in our soil, along with this mulch that I had in the wintertime, okay? So basically, we have this mulch, we have cow poop, and then we also have a nice big pile of compost, right? So these are three things that we're gonna all put together, right? And remember, if we just let it all decompose, then everything will start to generate a lot of microbial benefits for the soil. Microbial being these are microscopic organisms that are a part of the food web in the soil that will ultimately generate all kinds of nutrients like nitrogen and mycorrhizal fungus, and I know these are big words, but this is all really good stuff that will help the roots of your plants and everything. So we're not going to till this at all. A lot of people think you have to till the soil. We're just going to leave it down. And as you can see, I've already planted one, and this is my tomato. Okay, so over here, we're going to plant something too. But the way we planted this was we just left this like this, and then we put the manure on top of all that hay, okay? And we're getting our hands dirty because it's fun. And then we're going to put the compost on top of that. And we're going to spread it all around. Okay, break it up. I know this is cow poop, but it's really good for your plants. And it's actually really, really healthy for your plants. So you mix it all in, okay? And then we're going to put this basil plant in, because now we just made it really, really rich and full of nutrients. Okay, so we're going to dig a hole, and we're going to find when we dig the hole, we're going to see all that mulch from below, because remember we left it there? That's really good because we want that to slowly come back. And then we're going to dig our hole. Big enough for the basil plant to go in. And then when we get a big enough hole, maybe we might put a little bit of manure in there, okay? And then we're just gonna plant it in just like that without moving any of the dirt and all that stuff. And just like that. And then after we're done, we're gonna water this every couple of days because it's midsummer, and so we don't want it to get too hot for the plant. And you just let it go. And with all of those different things, with the cow poop and the compost, and as you can see, there's some bug life right here, which I can show you. I think if you can see that. So all kinds of things you can find in here, like all kinds of bugs and stuff that are really good for your plants. So if you do this in your gardens, it'll be fun because it's messy, but also you will have the nicest, biggest plants in the whole neighborhood. It'll be awesome. All right?
All right. So does anybody have any questions? Hold on one second.
Hi, Susan Bruce, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
Just a question in general about compost. Our compost consists mostly of kitchen scraps.
Sorry, can you hold on one second? I'm having a little bit of an issue there. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Our compost is generally kitchen scraps. And
yep.
We have pines and scrub oaks. The leaves don't decompose very much. We don't have any grass clippings. So it takes quite a long time for it to decompose. And is it okay to put compost on a bed like that is not fully decomposed? That still has, I don't know, avocado skins in it or something.
Yeah. Oh my God. Actually, thank you so much for bringing that up, because that actually segues really nicely into my follow-up to that video, actually, which is just in terms of how, you're bringing up, I'm gonna do this really quick. No, I guess I'll just speak like this. Yeah, it is, you bring up the conflict of when you have things that are still breaking down in your garden, and it's not soil yet, and so what do you do? So that's an excellent point, because that is, it kind of brings up the fact that this is kind of a long-term strategy, right? So you kind of have to choose an area that you're committed to for the next few years, and actually your initial harvests will not provide a very big yield, as opposed to if you were just going to throw in some like totally broken down compost and you grew some vegetables there, they would grow fine. But if you focused on the soil and building it up like that, even if you had avocado pits growing in there or decomposing in there for the next 40 years, that process of its interaction with the rest of the soil, you're not going to have a seed growing right next to it, but it's going to engage in that soil food web by slowly breaking down and kind of, it might even provide shelter for certain microorganisms, certain, shelter from predators, and it just kind of, it makes that kind of interchange of what really becomes a certain kind of biosphere that happens beneath our feet. So yeah, it will. And actually, I'll show you a case in point. So that video that I just showed you all, which is, this I shot that this past July, and so you saw that I was planting tomato and basil, and I'll show you what I harvested this summer. And I don't know if you can see my videos. This is pretty much it. This is it. Just 3 little tomatoes. So you know what? I'm an embracer of initial failure. This is only my 2nd summer using these practices in my garden. And I kind of was hoping for a lot of tomatoes, but it was also kind of a late planting because I planted those in July, which is a little late for tomatoes. And I am going to get more tomatoes in the fall. It's not totally awful, but yeah, essentially you're basically setting a foundational way for your garden to be better and better every year. So as opposed to just throwing in a big raised bed of compost that hasn't been able to process itself into that kind of biodiverse space, yeah, you are going to grow vegetables, but you're not going to have as much yield as, say, 5 years into developing really healthy no-till soil. So yeah, it's basically that's kind of generally what you do. In terms of like having chicken scraps like in the garden, another good thing to do is when you're done for the year, with when you have your tomato patch is done, instead of don't rip the plant out by the root, just cut it down and leave the roots in the soil and let it decompose. And if that's in the way the following season, just plant next to it, because those roots are basically create a whole almost urban network of interchange, and that those roots will kind of create these little like highways of travel for different microorganisms that might use it to transport themselves somehow. This is the kind of mixture of resources and materials that you can do, and strategies to kind of help the soil build itself. So so let me just take it from there. That was a good question. Were there any other questions by any chance?
I'm curious about, I think I understand the principle with smaller raised beds, which is similar to what I do, but in a big garden, starting out in the spring, there's weeds and there's all kinds of stuff. So
Right.
What does no-till do about that, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, and you have seasonal weeds, right? So you're talking about those kind of spring ephemerals that pop up, and then generally we'll have like summer weeds, which are like that really stubborn crabgrassy kind of stuff. I'll tell you, even now after all these workshops and doing this, it's still tempting for me to get out the tiller sometimes. But essentially, it's two things. You weed. You know, it's backbreaking work, but there are other strategies for mitigating weeds, and that is by using cover crops. This time of year is a really good time of year to be broadcasting. So there are three different things that we all can do in our garden right now for no-till practices, right? You can either cut everything back and start a winter crop like kale or spinach or any kind of winter hardy plant that will survive a frost and even maybe a light snowfall. Or you can cut everything back, put down a layer of compost, just a nice thin top dressing, and seed it with annual winter ryegrass seed, which I think you can. I think they do sell that at Agway in Orleans. They might also sell it at Hart's Farm in Harwich. Those are the only two I know of. I would tell you more, but I can't think of any. But you sprinkle the annual winter ryegrass on the soil, and it actually grows in the winter and dies in the spring. So it's a cover. It'll cover your crop. It'll cover your soil, and it basically fills that vacuum in the winter time. And when in the spring, when you're ready to plant, you just clip it all back, and you don't dig it out. You let the clippings just fall. You let them fall, and then you do another top dressing of compost on top of that. And so all of the clippings and all the roots from the annual winter ryegrass, that they basically diminish the opportunity for weeds to come in the spring. And then also, as they immediately decompose within weeks and add tons of nitrogen to your soil. So you're not only mitigating weeds, but you're also adding nutrients to your soil in a natural, organic way. So with those two methods, and then you quickly plant, then you have to worry about summer weeds, right? So in that case, it's just like a hay mulch and weeding, and basically that those are the kinds of things you can do that are kind of like long-term strategies. Just takes a little bit of planning and forethought, but very effective in the end. And you can also do cover crops in the summer. You also have a summer annual ryegrass. So yeah, I couldn't recommend that more because it just has so many benefits. And then the third thing you can do is get like a salt marsh hay from the beach. I tell people don't walk into any resource areas, don't go into any marshes or anything. But if you see some salt marsh hay just washed up on the beach at some town landing, definitely fill a bag of that with that and bring it to your garden and just lay it down. And the benefits of that is that it's seedless. It's bringing in all kinds of different nutrients that get washed up from the ocean. You get a little bit of acidity from the sand, and it can add some really important nutrients, and it's seedless, so you don't have to worry about weeds with that. And that's another really important thing to think about, is that if you do mulch, you have to really be careful about what is in the mulch. You can't just get like a hay bale or something, because you may very well be introducing a ton of weeds into your garden. Another seedless option is what they call, I think it's called Mulch Master, which is like a chopped straw hay. And I do believe they sell that at Agway in Orleans as well. And I'm sure a lot of other places sell these too. Those are just the ones that I know of. That stuff is seedless, and it actually breaks down really fast. So that's more of like a temporary kind of weed control. So
Hey, Ben.
yeah. Oh, hey, Ellie.
Hey, so what about leaf mulch, like ground up leaf mulch for the garden from all the fall leaves that fall down? And are there particular leaves that aren't good for the garden, or what do you think about that?
Anything is good. Anything like that is good. Like the more diversity that you can incorporate into your soil building is great. But I would say that pine needles is particularly nutrient rich. I don't know how to get a hold of pine needles. I would love to know how to do that, but pine needles are a great leaf mulch. And in terms of other leaves, yeah, like if you have a like a kind of a mulcher or you could also use a lawnmower. You like when you rake up your leaves in the fall, you can just lay them out in the yard. And this is actually Ellie, Ellie has talked about doing this, and just mow it. Just mow the leaves, and then that breaks them down, and that would go really well. Very not as likely to have any weed seed in there. Protect your weeds. So, yeah, go ahead.
What's your feeling about yard waste at transfer stations?
In terms of the efficacy of it, or
yeah, Wellfleet has a huge piles.
Right, to take from there, you mean?
Yeah.
That again, that's a little hit or miss because you kind of don't really know what's in there. I would ask the people at the gate, but I feel like that is just kind of a hidden variable there that you kind of don't know, like what
Pesticides, herbicides.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's another point. Either if it's weed seed or if someone was using herbicides or what, yeah. So
Okay.
all right. Well, we're gonna go back to questions in a little bit, but I'm gonna continue here. Kind of skip through here. So yeah, I guess this was basically just meant to be a little overview, like kind of get everybody up to speed with the concept of no-till and how like really the focus that we are giving is on the soil food web, okay? And again, as I said in the beginning, it's not just no-till. There are other practical applications that we can use to really benefit the soil, not just walking away and not doing anything, but you have to actually like have a plan. So this workshop is I'm kind of laying outlining to you all how you can kind of approach that planning process so that over time you can really say like, okay, right now it's late September, what should I be doing? Or it's December, like what can I be doing to be helping my soil right now? So these are just some strategies. So again, we're focusing on the soil food web. Another thing to take into consideration is companion planting. And so a really good example of that, is the cover crops that I'm talking about. The cover crop is technically a companion plant with other vegetables. And then, you can switch them every year. So that comes into crop rotation. And then of course, you can do different soil amendments to figure out what kind of pH balance your soil needs depending on what kind of plant you're planting. And I actually have a chart I can show at the end that will actually show you the necessary pH for different kinds of vegetables. And so kind of this kind of sums it all up, like why we're doing this. What's the benefit of all of this work that we're putting into just building our soil? And it truly does produce higher yields. And there are a lot of huge farms today that are converting to no-till practices. And again, as I said, I only have 3 plum tomatoes today because it's only my second year in my no-till farm. But these farmers all say pretty much unanimously that after the 3rd year, they start producing more yields than they've ever had in like their careers as farmers. So that's becoming the common refrain from a lot of these farmers taking these practices, because they're seeing all the benefits of the healthier soil. There's more intricate pest control, natural pest control, because when you're increasing the biodiversity, you're increasing predation on pests, and you're also just generally creating a really dynamic environment that can really prevent any kind of plant pest or insect pest or anything like that. And then when you have this diversity, the moisture retains. We have to remember that soil isn't just soil, it's also pockets of air, and it's also moisture. And in these pockets of air, the more oxygen you have underneath the soil, the more possibility for moisture to be retained and not leaching below. And so that way you have better chance of combating droughts, which we just had. We're actually kind of still in the midst of a drought. So if you are 5 years into your no-till garden and there's a drought, you are 3 times as likely for your plants to survive than your neighbor who's not doing this. So yeah, generally over time it leads to lower maintenance, and you can focus your time on expanding your garden rather than fussing so hard with one little plot. So that kind of just summarizes the philosophy behind these practices. And so I kind of wanted to just do that review, because when you look at soil, you really, there's so much to learn from it. And the reason why there's so much to learn from it is because soil is the product of our whole natural history on this earth, building on top of itself. And we can really glean a lot from the history of Cape Cod and the agricultural traditions of Cape Cod that actually can inform how we look at the soil in the first place. So I guess I'll just start by showing this. Has anyone ever seen a picture like this before? Like it's a pine tree, and does anybody know what we're looking at?
We're looking at the root mass.
Okay. Can anybody else? Is that what everybody else thinks?
And the fungus.
You got it right. Good. So that orange arrow is pointing to the roots, and the green arrow is pointing to the mycorrhizae fungus. So I don't know. So you can tell the difference. The fungus is the white stuff, and the roots are kind of like brownish on the top, right? So essentially, this is what it should look like when your soil's really healthy. This mycorrhizal fungus is constructed of this scaffolding of what's called hyphae, which are these long threads that are about 1/10 the size of a strand of hair. And if you have really, really healthy soil with a lot of mycorrhizal fungus, and you took all of that out and stretched it out into one line, it would go from here to the other side of New York in just 1 cubic feet of mycorrhizal fungus. So the scale of it is very small, and a lot of it can fit in one space. And I'll tell you, that tree right there is going to be really healthy. All the very tips of these threads right here are basically channels for nutrients, for nitrogen, carbon, whatever this tree needs. And this fungus is channeling all the way through this network into the roots of the tree, and the tree is getting all the nutrients it needs. And so Likewise, the tree is absorbing atmospheric carbon, and it might be absorbing some other things, and it's sending all of those things to the fungus, feeding the fungus. So it's 100% symbiotic. And as it feeds the fungus grows larger and larger, and actually might connect to other trees, other
Right.
funguses connected to trees. And actually, there are a lot of studies going on right now that are saying that trees are actually able to communicate to each other, sending electrical signals through the roots, through this fungus, and back and forth to each other. And this is actually how a lot of forests survive disease. It's really interesting. And this is all like kind of breaking information. This is all like brand new studies that they're coming up with. So this kind of just shows you like the difference of what the picture on the left is only roots, and the picture on the right is roots with mycorrhizal fungus. This stuff we really want. And here's the thing. The only way we can sustain this mycorrhizal fungus is if we do no till. If we tilled that, all that fungus would be destroyed. And we don't want that, but that wouldn't be the only thing it wouldn't be destroyed. And that's where the soil food web comes in. You can kind of see fungus is on the very bottom of the food chain. And as I said, it's connected to the plant roots and shoots in the bottom. And then they provide a food source for things like arthropods, nematodes, which then are eaten by larger nematodes and larger arthropods, which are then eaten by birds and other animals. So there's this whole intricate, this is the very general broad stroke of it. But, of all of these nematodes and arthropods and fungus, there's thousands and thousands of different types and varieties of each. So it really becomes like this whole network, this kind of wild west of all different participants and stakeholders in the society that is taking place underneath our feet, which is really great. So I can definitely I will just say right now, I can definitely send people these materials if you just type in the message board your email address. And also, I'm kind of forming like kind of an email list to kind of let everybody know about future workshops. So if you also want that, just send me your email address on the message board, and I will forward anybody these graphics.
Right.
I guess I also I guess I'll open up if anyone has any questions again.
This is Fred again. I enjoyed this. Thank you. I have to run.
No problem.
I'm in Truro, and town meeting is going to start in a while.
Oh, good. All right. Well, you go do that. Thank you so much for coming, Fred.
Hope you do more. Thank you.
Absolutely, definitely. Let us know, and we'll send you the next one. All right. So it's just us then. So does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, good. Let's see here. Okay, so so here just kind of shows a little bit more information. I can also send this as well. And just kind of shows if you look at the picture on the left, the clump of dirt to the left versus the clump of dirt to the right. And I guess I would just ask, which one do you guys think is no-till?
Right.
Yeah, right. You can see it's a lot healthier. And a really good test for you to do if you want to do this in your soil, just to see the soil quality of your soil, you can dig up a clump like that and kind of just put it in a mesh kind of thing on top of a jar, and then just pour water over it, and you can see like how turbid it gets. If things break apart really easily and it turns milky, or if that clump stays together and nothing really falls off of it. if nothing really falls off of it, that's extremely healthy soil, and that's kind of what you want ultimately. If everything's breaking it apart and it turns to mud and muck, then that tells you you need to start getting serious about no-till methods. So also, I guess, you know, when you look at your soil, you can also engage in this historical process that I want to talk about. So we're gonna rewind to 10,000 years ago, when the glacier formed. I'm assuming that everyone is pretty well versed on the fact that there was a glacier here on Cape Cod. I'm assuming. Can I get confirmation on that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. You know, if you live on Cape Cod, you kind of have to know about that stuff. So I know I might be repeating things that are known, but I really, even though I know about this, I found that there's so much to learn about it, particularly when currently we are undergoing a really rapid shift in global warming and the changing of the glaciers that we have now. I think it's really important to look at how the glacier was. We've been steadily warming since 10,000 years ago, and now it's rapidly happening. So what's important to look at in terms of the changes that are happening, right? So 10,000 years ago, that image of the world, you can see that was the entire northern part of the globe was covered in ice. And so here's the bigger picture. So this is from 19,000 BC. And then, you know, this is the difference between the ice age and today. It's vast. And also, you know, these ice sheets were a mile thick. So it's absolutely crazy. It's, you know, before Cape Cod was even formed. And then this is what they're saying it'll look like in about 1,000 years. So obviously that, you know, doesn't pertain to us. We'll be gone, but, you know, it's just seeing that trajectory, you know, just it's very dramatic when you consider how, you know, how far along we are. And then, you know, so here's the kind of time lapse of the glacier over time. And you know, if anyone's interested, again, I can send you the websites that these things are on. It's really interesting. And they also, I believe NASA actually has time lapses of glaciers melting in the past 10 years, and they're just absolutely devastating. But anyways, so here's basically just you know, I'm slowly zooming in and talking about Cape Cod in a second, but essentially it was made up of different ice sheets that took up different areas. And so these different ice sheets melted, receded, moved, slid, picked up sediment and deposited it elsewhere. And this basically is a process that led to the creation of Cape Cod. And this is a really interesting diagram of how the creation of Cape Cod is so connected to actually throughout the Midwest and up into the Rocky Mountains, because you can see these gray areas right here. This is the glacial moraines, which is the aftermath of the southern extent of the Laurentide ice sheet. So as the ice sheet was melting and receding, it sagged south, and it created this kind of edge. If you guys take an ice cube and you cover it in sand, and then you just leave the ice cube out and you make it melt, all that sand will congregate on the outer parts of where the ice melted. So that's essentially what's happening on the macro scale. And Cape Cod is one of those moraines, right? So we have these moraines which are actually buttressing the Great Lakes watershed. And then once you go across the Appalachians, it becomes more of a coastal outwash plain as it's near the ocean. So it's really interesting stuff. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this has everything to do with our soil, right? As we get closer into Cape Cod, you see we have these kind of spinal columns that are created by the glacier. And here in the blue, we have these two moraines. So those are the moraines zoomed in. And then the rest of Cape Cod basically is just kind of an outwash. So as the glacier melted, everything just kind of washed out and turned into these kind of deltic landscapes. So that being said, you can kind of see right here what that looks like. So this diagram on the top is a diagram of when we had the glacier, right? And all this sediment right here in the pink, that's sediment that had been deposited from previous melting. And then as it recedes and recedes more, it forms the moraine. So here's actually, I think this is the moraine. And then the rest of Cape Cod basically becomes this outwash plain. So you can kind of see these are all the kettle ponds, right? And all these streams over here, it basically creates a delta, right? And so that's why you have Eastham. Eastham is so flat, right? And that's because it just turned into this kind of outwash plain where all the sediment just kind of got evenly distributed. And then also these kettle holes are formed where the water kind of congregates. So this is a picture of a present day glacier of what that looks like, right? So at some point, this is what Cape Cod looked like. This is the glacier, and you can see how dirty it is. It's completely full of sediment, and it's just being deposited into these kind of stream beds that are really less alluvial and more deltic, right? So fast forwarding to today, this is kind of a profile of what the soil looks like on Cape Cod. And you can kind of see right on the top, right? This is the organic layer, right? And then as you get deeper into the profile, it's all sand, and it's coarse and it's gravelly, and this is the kind of soil we have to deal with. And a lot of people, if you just go outside and you dig a hole 1 foot deep, you will see this top organic layer, and then immediately underneath will be just really sandy, right? So then what happens? I guess before I continue, does anybody have a question about all that stuff? No? Okay. Yeah, so essentially, I'm kind of that was kind of the geological side of looking at your soil and what will be going on way beneath our feet. But then the next thing I wanted to look at is what happened up until then. I will just say that fast forwarding to 1621 can be a good a good narrative, because it shows what you have that natural history of the soil building up on itself, and then what happened to the soil after that when there was an influx of white settlement, and all of the extreme kinds of inputs and use of resources of the land, and what that did to the soil, essentially. Now, I will say that just because I'm not talking about before 1621 doesn't mean I don't think any of that's less important. I simply don't have the authority to discuss those things. I don't know. I'm not trained or educated in how the Indians used their land. I do have some indications. I know This is a graphic. I apologize that it's a little blurry, but again, this is something I can send you. This is a graphic that the National Park Service has that kind of gives you an impression of how Native Americans used the land on Cape Cod, and kind of just how it was this community-based resource sharing system where everybody kind of contributed to the land. And that's really the extent of my knowledge. I'm absolutely positive there's more to it than that, but we're fast forwarding to what white settlers have done. And one good book, since this is a program with the library, I will make some book recommendations that describe these concepts that I'm talking about, which is basically this book, Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick, that some of you might have heard from from this author who actually comes from Nantucket. Basically, he talks about how, in spite of everything, that came out of the Pilgrim settlement in Plymouth, that there is actually a lot of evidence to say that the Pilgrims were really bad at adapting to their land. They were mostly starving. They were not really good at learning how this landscape that they were unfamiliar with worked. They didn't understand the sandy soils. That it's a completely different soil profile than they had in England, for the very reasons I described with the formation of Cape Cod from the glacier. They don't know how these soils work. And so this was the beginning. When the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth, it was the beginning of a long odyssey of Europeans just not doing a good job with their land, and how long it took them to actually adapt and adopt sustainable practices over time. And so this book basically speaks to that, in addition to a lot of other elements to the story. But specifically, they basically failed as a society because they were not students of their land, and they were not working with the natives to figure out how to use the land and how the natives survived and all that. So this is another book that I wanted to bring up by the same author, that I recommend both of them. And essentially both books just talk about the human relationship with the land and where we go wrong, and how it's this kind of dichotomy of how we tend to think we can conquer nature, but Mother Nature always wins, right? So it's really about having this kind of respect, this mutual respect of how nature just has its own way, and we can kind of learn lessons from history that tell us, how can we work with nature, right? That's really the main philosophy of no-till farming. And what were the lessons from when people did not work with nature, and how they were trying to conquer nature, those kinds of concepts. It's really interesting. So fast forwarding to the year, roughly, I would say the mid 1700s, one of the pilgrims that came over on the Mayflower was by the name of Higgins. And then his son, Benjamin Higgins, was one of the co-founders of the town of Eastham, which Wellfleet used to be a part of. His Benjamin Higgins' great-grandson, Elkanah Higgins II, then built this house, which is in North Eastham. And actually this house, I guess, give me 1 second. Can everybody see my face now?
Yes.
Okay. That house actually happens to be the house that I'm inside of right now. Yeah, so this is actually my family summer house. And we actually, this came into my family in the 1960s. but we actually bought it from the Higgins family. And I guess I'll just go back to that really quick, just to show you the picture of that. So everybody must know of that Atwood Higgins house
Mm-hmm.
in Wellfleet. So this is actually, hold on one second. So this is actually the picture. This is a house in Eastham, and I do believe it's a completely different side of the Higgins family. But essentially, this is a colonial house that was built in the 1700s, and it was, as you can kind of see with the horses, it was an old stagecoach stop for traders or visitors who are on their way to Provincetown to do trading. And these people were also farmers. And so essentially, I guess just to make it a little bit fun, who can guess what they might have farmed back then?
Turnips.
Turnips, yes, exactly. So they grew turnips and asparagus, right? And so that really says everything you need to know about that question. What did they do to adapt to the land, right? So I brought up those subject of the Pilgrims and how they did not understand the land. In the early 1800s, they started having a lot of droughts, and they even had this major climatic event in the year 1816 that they referred to as the year without a summer. Has anyone heard of that before? You have, Susan? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So this really impacted this family in the year 1816, because what preceded that summer, well, I'll get to that in a second, but essentially what the story goes is that in the fall of 1815, an enormous volcano erupted in Southeast Asia, and it was such an enormous deposition of ash into the atmosphere that it caused a global cooling event in the European and North American continents. And so that ended up happening the following summer. And there are reports, there's actually a lot of material about this at the Eastham Library. I'm not sure, we can actually ask Naomi when she comes back. I think she's coming back at, she'll come back at some point. We can ask her what the Wellfleet Library has on the subject. But the Eastham Library has a whole historical shelf, and there's a lot of information on this that basically talks about like testimonials of people waking up in the morning, and it's 90 degrees on a July summer morning, and by 2:00 p.m. it'll be 32 degrees and snowing in the middle of July. So this entailed was major crop failures. People's corn, people would have whole stalks of corn that would just completely shrivel after a snowfall. And it was repeated. It happened basically all summer long, right? So when I see this picture and I think about what happened that summer, and I just, I think about, I look behind me and I see my house, it's pretty well preserved. And so like, obviously these people were resilient. They had to adapt at some point, right? The Plymouth colony did not survive, right? That ended up failing as a colony and ended up becoming Massachusetts Bay Colony. So they were not resilient. What happened there basically what happened here that didn't happen there? What did they do to adapt? So what the kind of research that I've come up with is that by the mid 1800s, farmers just kind of realized that, that the only crops that work here are turnips and asparagus, right? So that's essentially, maybe you might think that's limiting, but that's essentially that's adaptation. That's saying, you know, Cape Cod soils are really good for these vegetables, and let's just go with that, right? And so you know, I'll go down the road, and I'll just walk down the road, and I'll actually see wild asparagus just growing out of the yard or growing out of the side of the road. Another example of adaptation and resilience, right? So asparagus can be the most resilient kind of vegetable, particularly in this environment. Another thing that I discovered was heirloom hops growing in the backyard after we cleared out a little bit. And so the assumption is that they used to brew their own beer here, and those hops were hops that were growing there a couple hundred years ago. And so this is something to really consider, because when we see, you know, the remnants of farming that took place in the 1800s, you know, that just shows that nature is so much more resilient than we give it credit for. A seed can be preserved for hundreds of years, decades, and then when the right conditions happen, it'll germinate. So this happens with, I know a lot of blackberries do this. You'll have an overgrown area in your woods, and then you totally clear it out. The next thing you know, it's full of blackberry. And the reason why that's happening is because those seeds were preserved by all the natural duff, all that, you know, all of this leaf litter that, I'll go back to this, you know, this leaf litter. This can be a form of preserving different elements of life, because again, let's go back to these microscopic organisms. They are preserving that seed in some form, you know, that is basically setting up the conditions for a seed to be preserved. So that just kind of, that's a point I kind of want to bring up, that we can find things in our history in the soil, and we can actually see these remnants of things just by looking at the soil profile. So I just want to, you know, fast forward to this picture down here, because, you know, like this means that we have to remember that the soil on Cape Cod is really sandy, right? So when we kind of think about, you know, this preserving the soil really is up to us, based on we first have to know what's happening with the soil, right? And when you think about over time how the soil was used in the past, you know, all of these farmers did a lot of tilling, right? And so we spent hundreds of years tilling the soil, and this organic layer, I guess I would just open up a question to everybody. What do you think happens to this organic layer when it's tilled in with this more mineral layer down here? What would you say, to just paint a picture, describe what the effect of that would be if anybody is interested?
What do you mean?
Anybody? Yeah.
Well, I think it's pretty evident if we look at our own soil, and ours looks like the soil at the bottom, which is basically pure sand.
Right.
That it just erodes and disappears. And
is it like that on the surface layer as well?
Well, in the case of the garden we built this year, it was, prior to that, it was gravel on top of landscape cloth.
Oh, okay.
It was challenging, but and
Yeah.
Ben, I hate to say this, but now that I've got my mic going here, I can't stay either. It's my husband's
that's okay.
birthday, and I have to go
Birthday.
do all the entertaining things that.
No problem. No.
But
No,
is it being recorded?
Yes, and we're gonna have others as well, and I can, definitely give us your email if you want us to send you any of that, those
Yes.
materials.
I will definitely do that. And I'm involved with the Friends of the Library, and I have to say we really appreciate
Oh, good.
all of the workshops you've done. And
Oh, thank you. I'm glad.
didn't you also do knitting?
Nice. Oh, the boomerang bags.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, we really appreciate all of that.
Oh, good. I'm
thank
so
you.
glad. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Thanks, Susan.
Okay.
So does anybody else kind of have an idea of like what might happen to the tilling of that soil? Can anybody? I can give the answer, but I want to challenge everybody. What do you think, Susie?
I know the organic stuff goes away, but I don't know what makes it go away.
Right. Well, essentially what makes it go away is that you're distributing it, right? So again, as I kind of going back to this image, like this, if you're distributing all of the fungus to a larger area, those interactions are gone forever, and you're not going to have them again until later. So kind of going back to this picture, when you're distributing that organic layer, you're kicking up all the sand to the top, and you're spreading all the good stuff out into the sand. Now, one of the reasons why this organic layer is so thin is just because of decades and decades of farming on the land. So one of the things that I like to do, and that I recommend other people do to learn more about your land, is to kind of do some research like I did about my historical summer house on what was done with the land. If it's very possible, for example, there's actually somebody on the workshop right now, Ellie. I know where she lives, and her house is actually located on the farm where my family's old farmhouse is, right? So Ellie can actually go out and she can look at her soil, very thin organic layer, and then underneath is all mineral. And the reason why is because of decades after decade of farmers tilling the soil and doing that, just distributing all the organic material and kicking up all the sand. And then meanwhile, all of the inputs with the harvest and everything, it's basically an extraction method, extracting the nutrients out of the ground and the resources out of the ground, rather than what we call regenerative, right? So this is kind of the final thesis of this concept. You start with no-till, and then you go through this practice and this self-education on how to build your soil, and then you get to the point where you're actually being regenerative rather than extractive, right? So as you're building that soil, if the farmers on Cape Cod actually incorporated these no-till methods, we would have a much thicker organic layer that was sustained over decades, and there would be a lot more diversity of vegetation on Cape Cod. So you look around the landscape of Cape Cod, you have the pine barrens, you have black locusts everywhere, you know the usual suspects of invasives like honeysuckle and bittersweet and knotweed and everything. And you really, you see the Cape Cod landscape is almost kind of in the great scheme of things, monocultural. You don't have as much biodiversity as you would in a place like in Western Mass, where there's a more dynamic soil chemistry. But because Cape Cod's mineral layers are so fragile that when white settlers came here and basically engaged in an extractive use of the land, that made what was already a fragile soil profile that we saw with how the glacier was created, basically became like an even more fragile, much thinner organic layer. So kind of the reason why I give these workshops is kind of to raise the alarm bells with this stuff, because it's not, we have climate change and serious rapid environmental changes happening in the very recent past. But essentially the case I'm making is that this was decades and centuries in the making, just by looking at the soil. And so there's no time like today then to take corrective action and to really look at how, that we're inheriting a legacy of practices that have kind of left us with very poor soil quality. And we're kind of like the generations before us resigned themselves to only growing turnips and asparagus. I think we can do better than that, but these are just kind of the kinds of concepts I want to promote in people when they're in their gardens, and they can kind of use these regenerative practices to not only help themselves with higher yields and a bigger garden, but also we're kind of correcting centuries of poor practices, one property at a time. Everybody does it this way in their own gardens, then we can ultimately improve things over time. And again, a lot of these farmers, all it took was 3 or 4 years, and the moisture retention was higher, the yields were higher, there's more biodiversity. So yeah, it's basically like there's like so much good about it, and there's so much urgency to it that it's just kind of like a really good way to really help the environment, help ourselves. And I guess like on a last note, I would just say that I plan on continuing with these workshops in the future. Please send us an email address so we can tell you about that in the future. But I really want this to be a community exchange. So I want to bring up these topics of historic land use of Cape Cod, and have people kind of do their own homework on their own properties and come back to these workshops, to the next one, and really like bring these concepts to the next workshop, and kind of do a little bit of your own digging, both figuratively and literally, in terms of what you think might be happening in your soil. So go do some historical research. Yeah, go ahead, Susie.
I have a question. There's a sandy driveway down to where I'm staying, and
Yep.
you can see the layers because, it's kind of, eroded. And
Yeah.
there's the top layer with the little bushy green stuff. And then there's a thin layer of gray all the way down, and then the sand. And I'm wondering, what's the gray? Was there a big fire here, or some kind of alluvial deposit that left this band of gray under the green and on top of the sand?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So gray, it depends on, I believe gray means iron. I would have to double check on that and let you know. Is it Naomi? Do you happen to do you? I don't know if you're totally knowledgeable of soil science, but is that correct?
Come in, Naomi.
Is Naomi here? Maybe not. So, uh, yeah, I'm just checking my soil color chart here because gray is yeah. Give me 1 second here. Yep, so basically it's iron. Yeah. So that so basically a lot of plants cannot grow in something that has so much iron in it. And essentially the grayness is kind of the food source of any organic matter that's in there, so it creates this gray hue. But I do have a lot more notes on that, on what gray you're talking about. And usually, like, if you dig into wetlands, like if you not, I'm not saying do that. That's very bad. Don't dig into a wetland. But if you know, if you're a soil scientist and you're doing a core, you'll see that there will be a horizon of gray because that basically is actually, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. It's the lack of iron that's causing the gray. And the reason why is because of the vegetation that's growing there is taking all the iron out of the soil. Right. And so it's been a while since I looked at that chart, so I kind of had to remember that. Yeah, but yeah, no, that's so essentially that can be an indication of the vegetation there, where they like iron. It can be an indication of wetlands, where the plants will really take all the iron out of. And actually, no, it's not the plants. It's because moisture creates an environment that takes iron out of the soil. So I don't know that necessarily would be the remnants of a fire. It's possible that it could be from an old fire. But you can email me a picture, and I can kind of take a look at it, and also send you some more information on that. But no, that's really good, because that's the philosophy I'm trying to impart on you all, is do a little bit of research. Like, I'll help you too. Send me some information and I'll help you, because I'm interested myself. And you know, I have a lot of knowledge of the Eastham history, and I'm a student of Wellfleet's history, and just kind of, you know, one thing you can do is go you know, talk to the historical society in town, and find out, you know, was there an old farmhouse near where I lived? Do they have any information? You know, if so, is there any information? You might be really surprised. You might find that your property was on a former farm, or it was near, or if it wasn't, you might find some other history about it that can also tell you about the soil, right? So that would actually be a good thing, because maybe your soil wasn't as impacted as it would as like, someone who lives on a former farm where it was tilled all the time. So like finding those nuances, and you know, like you can dig in one property, and you know, an inch down, it's that really sugary sand that moves around. that filters water really fast. It doesn't retain water, so you're going to have a lot harder time watering your plants, especially in a drought. You know, things like that. And you know, just do a little like history lesson with yourself. Talk to the historical society. And actually, when Naomi gets back on, I'm going to ask her if the library has any books or resources, you know, in connection with the historical society, on how people can do that, and see what she thinks. So Naomi, are you there by any chance? That's okay. So I guess does anybody have any questions about their properties, and like maybe we can, I don't know, I kind of want to start turning these workshops into community engagement. So I was just wondering if people wanted to, if there was interest in kind of doing your own research, or I would even engage in that with you. And then coming back to the next workshop and kind of like turning this into, you know, a sharing of information. I want to get like a roadmap of like Wellfleet, Eastham, Orleans, and what's kind of happening in the soil in Truro and Provincetown, the Outer Cape, and kind of what's happening with our soil from, you know, the whole scale of the Outer Cape, but also like site specific, you know, and we can kind of tell a story.
Ben,
Yeah.
I like the idea of researching our property and reporting back on it. I did have a question. You recommended with tomatoes, chopping them off at ground level in the garden and not pulling up the roots. Would that go for other plants like lettuces and?
Absolutely. Anything.
Anything.
Yeah. Like corn. You know, it's like, for example, beans, especially you would want to do that with, because beans are a nitrogen fixer. And so when you're growing beans throughout the summer, they're trapping nitrogen from the atmosphere and placing it into your soil. You know, that's as mechanical as a, you know, sustainable or organic soil building gets. You get something coming out of the atmosphere and putting it into your soil that then goes into other plants, right? So if you cut the beans down, all those nitrogen fixing roots, which also have nitrogen, will decompose and add even more nitrogen to the soil. And so that's the same effect as that winter rye, you know, that it has that same nitrogen fixing effect. So those are things. But even if it's not a nitrogen fixer, you know, there's still nutrient exchange. There's still, you know, like I was kind of talking about the avocado pit. You know, these roots can provide shelter for certain microbials and that kind of stuff. So, and the other thing is that, like, you know, worms will like start to eat the roots and stuff, you know, and break it down even more. So eventually it'll become dirt. It's just adding to that kind of scaffolding of your soil food web even more. So yeah, pretty much anything, go ahead and just leave it there.
I have a question.
Sure.
I am a transplant from the Mid-Atlantic area, and my property there had been a farmland as late as the early 1900s. And when I would garden there, I would find oyster shells in the soil.
Oh, wow.
And I was told that that was common to add them to the soil for various nutrients, but I don't see that here. And so I'm wondering about that.
Okay, good question. I would say that were you near the ocean in the Mid-Atlantic, or
Philadelphia area?
Okay, yeah. Well, I guess that's kind of near a little bit.
Not real close, but from talking to various people in that area, I understand that that was a pretty common thing
Okay.
for oyster shells to be shipped to places for farmlands.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. No, I would say that the purpose of that would be to create an alkalizing effect for the soil. So it could very well be that you know, I don't know Philadelphia area's soil history very much, but
It's a very fertile area, a clay soil for the most
yeah,
part.
clay. So it could very well be to counterbalance that kind of clay element, you know, where it kind of needs a little bit of alkaline, and you know, possibly to balance out acidity that might be going on. But yeah, actually, I would say if what you were going for was alkalizing the soil, I would say yeah, oyster shells would be a good way to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And again, oyster shells aren't going to break down, as Lillian just demonstrated it probably from decades and decades ago. But just like the avocado pit, you know, it will serve a purpose because even though it doesn't completely break down, it's still providing, you know, an alkalinity or any kind of nutrient to the soil. So.
Ben,
Yes.
as far as the food web goes, what do tons of ants in your sandy soil do for the food web? Anything?
Yeah. I don't know much about the entomology of things, but I mean, I generally would just say that any kind of diversity is, well, that's not true. Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that question because you know you might have pet ants that are pests. You might have ants that are docile, but you know, generally speaking, ants might contribute to the tunneling that you want in the soil. That that tunneling that's more space, that's more air pockets, which means more moisture retention. When the ants are done living there, it'll fill in with other animals, you know, that kind of thing. So I would say if it's like clearly an invasive thing where like ants are everywhere and taking over your garden, like just try to scrape them out or something. I don't know, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to see, let's see here. I'm going to stop sharing and I'd like to see if, oh, there's Naomi. See if anybody has given me their email addresses. So I guess if any,
I wrote them down, a bunch of them.
oh, you wrote them down. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
anyone who wrote it down in the chat, I got it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I guess I mean unless there are more questions, I'm pretty much done. But I might just as like a little fun thing on the side give a quick tour of the house since I'm here. Naomi, you must have missed it, but I talked about the history of my family's house used to be a farmhouse. So I'm just kind of
Was that picture that we used for the flyer, was that yours?
yes, and I'm actually inside.
Oh wow! Oh, that's nice. Thanks for filling me in on that. Cool.
So
Here we go.
a fun thing. So I'm just gonna move over here. All right. So is that clear enough to people?
It's a little blurry, but it's okay.
Blurry. Okay. So this is a fireplace, and let's see. Okay. Let me move this chair. So in the 1800s, where I'm standing would have been like a long farm table, right? and then up in the ceiling, you can see up there, there would be like pots and pans hanging down from here, right? And then, this is where they did their cooking. Fireplace right here. And to the side, this opens up
Wow.
into
Mm,
a little wood stove. I don't know if you can see that.
little bake
Bring it
oven.
closer. But essentially, the fire's down there, and it's like a little pizza oven here almost. So
Oh,
that's
that's
where
so
they
cool.
do all their baking. So yeah, just very kind of and it's really interesting. It has all of the original moldings and stuff. Original door handles and very fun. But this is kind of more of it. I guess I'll just come to the front here. It's three-sided, so it doesn't look like a whole house right now. But yeah, it's much more fun in person, and maybe I'll invite people for a personal tour sometime. When people can interact together after the pandemic is over. But yeah, I really.
Ooh, I think he
Froze.
froze up. Ben, I think you might have frozen up there. Well, we'll see if he's gonna make it on back, give him a minute, but let me just wind up from our side of saying, obviously I love having Ben around. He's such an amazing resource for us and so generous with his knowledge, and it's really refreshing that he's so collaborative. So I feel really lucky, and I hope that we continue to have more programs with him. That said, I'd actually like to know what participants think. Are there other programs in this mode of sustainability and farming and gardening and things like that? Different programs that you would like to actually see us run, that you would like to learn more information on. And that would include, books you'd like us to buy or videos you'd like us to have, so that you can continue your quest for knowledge in these times. So with that said, I think that we can bring it to a close, and thank you all for coming. And let's look forward to meeting again sometime.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.